It wasn't until the last cruiser pulled away, Karen screaming that she would sue the department into oblivion, that I finally sat down in my patio chair and exhaled. The meat had overcooked slightly in all the commotion, but the taste of justice, smoky, ironic, and dripping in barbecue sauce, more than made up for it. I chewed in stunned silence as neighbors slowly emerged from their hiding spots like cautious prairie dogs. Mrs. Gutierrez from 2 doors down clutched her Yorkie like a baby and whispered, "Did they really say fraud?" I nodded. "An identity theft." The dog looked shocked too. Just as I was about to pour myself a stiff glass of sweet tea and maybe bask in the glow of karmic victory, one of the officers returned on foot. He approached with a different energy, professional, but less tense now that the fire-breathing dragon lady had been caged. "Hey, sir," he said, glancing at the now-silent grill. "Sorry again for the disturbance. Just wanted to check if you'd be willing to make a formal statement about the incident. Not about the barbecue, about her behavior." I raised an eyebrow. Like how she stormed onto private property and used the phrase, "illegal smoke particles" unironically? He cracked a grin. "Exactly that." We stepped over to my patio table, where I filled out a brief statement about the encounter. Nothing too formal, but enough to confirm her aggressive behavior and the fact that she trespassed without invitation. As I signed, the officer mentioned, "Funny thing is, we wouldn't have found the warrant if she hadn't pushed it." Apparently, the county systems didn't always sync cleanly, and it took a specific officer to run her ID through both the local and neighboring jurisdictions. It was an old warrant, 2 years old in fact, connected to some bizarre series of forged HOA reimbursement forms under a different name. She'd apparently fled just before the hearing. "She probably thought no one would link her new address here," he said. "Until she started drawing this much attention." Of course she did. Karen had been the self-appointed queen of order since she arrived in our neighborhood about a year and a half ago. She wasted no time inserting herself into the HOA board and quickly became the loudest voice at every meeting. At first, I thought she was just one of those classic suburban micromanagers, annoying but harmless. But over time, she morphed into a walking storm cloud of passive-aggressive warnings and unnecessary fines. A misplaced trash can? $75. A lawn 2 days overdue for mowing? $50. A garden gnome too whimsical for her taste? Immediate notice of violation. I once joked that her yard was more surveilled than Fort Knox. She didn't laugh. She fined me for an unlicensed decorative structure, a wind chime. The stories spread quickly after her arrest. Turns out I wasn't the only one she'd harassed. Mr. Stevenson had been fined for installing solar panels she claimed reflected sunlight into her windows. Little Emma across the street got a violation slip because her lemonade stand didn't comply with HOA sales zoning. One neighbor admitted that Karen had threatened to sue her for suspicious laughter during quiet hours. That one sounded absurd, until I remembered hearing Karen quote the HOA bylaws by heart like they were scripture. But now those rules weren't her shield anymore. They were evidence. The next day, still full from leftover ribs and petty triumph, I got a call from a detective with the Stone County DA's office. He introduced himself as Detective Halvorsen and wanted to ask a few questions. "We think she's been bouncing between neighborhoods, inserting herself into HOA boards, and skimming money through ghost reimbursements and misappropriated dues." I blinked. "So she's like a con artist? But HOA themed. More like HOA weaponized," he said grimly. "We've been trying to track her since she skipped her court appearance 2 years ago." I agreed to meet with him that afternoon. When he showed up, he brought a folder. No joke, an actual manila folder stuffed with documents, fake names, complaint logs, and printouts of doctored HOA budget. The handwriting on some of the falsified forms? It matched complaint letters Karen had personally slipped into my mailbox months earlier. I showed him the stack I had saved, and his eyes widened. "These are gold," he said. "Most people toss these out." "I'm petty," I replied. And I like paper trails. He photographed everything, including the HOA newsletters Karen had distributed with unapproved rule changes typed in small print. One memo bizarrely claimed that weekday barbecuing is discouraged for moral reasons. That one really stuck in my craw. It was clear Karen had a whole scam routine. She'd target neighborhoods with weak oversight, worm her way into the board, overwhelm everyone with fake rule changes and bureaucracy, and then start siphoning money through maintenance reimbursements and unapproved vendor payments. When things got suspicious, she'd vanish. But this time, her ego got the best of her. She couldn't resist trying to dominate yet another HOA, even if it meant screaming at a guy cooking pulled pork on a Saturday. Detective Halvorsen asked if I'd be willing to testify if the case went to trial. I said I'd consider it, as long as I could bring my smoker to the courthouse step. He chuckled. Honestly, with everything you've documented, it might not even go to trial. She's cooked. That evening, I noticed something strange on our neighborhood's social media group. A few HOA board members, Karen loyalists or Karen tourage, as we'd privately dubbed them, were posting vague statements. Let's not jump to conclusions, wrote Susan, the treasurer who always seemed to parrot Karen's talking points. Karen has done so much for our community. This is clearly a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding involving a warrant, fake names, and stolen HOA funds? Sure, Susan. Next you'll say the gnome attacked her first. By the next HOA meeting, the temperature had risen in the neighborhood, figuratively and literally. People weren't just gossiping now, they were angry. And when I received an official violation notice 2 days after Karen's arrest, for causing undue emotional stress to a board member during an HOA incident, I realized this wasn't over. The board was trying to protect Karen's legacy. Maybe out of fear. Maybe out of guilt. Maybe because they were complicit. The envelope had been hand-delivered by none other than Susan herself. She wore oversized sunglasses and a fake smile like a villain in a low-budget courtroom drama. "We're just doing our duty," she chirped. "We're all about maintaining harmony." I stared at the $250 fine stapled to a form that cited Article 9B, Community Disturbance via Aromatic Invasiveness. I'd read that HOA rulebook. There was no such article. I smiled. Tell the rest of the Karen tourage to buckle up. Because if they thought Karen's arrest was the end, they had no idea what I was about to cook up next. I was mid-flip on a rack of baby back ribs, basking in the smoky aroma of my Saturday sanctuary, when the scream of "That's illegal!" cut through the air like a fire alarm possessed. I looked up to see Karen, yes, that Karen, charging into my backyard like she had just discovered I was stockpiling explosives instead of hickory-smoked brisket. Her perfectly shellacked bob bounced with fury, phone already clutched to her ear like a grenade. "I'm reporting an open flame. It's a hazard to the entire block. There are children breathing in this smoke," she shrieked, pointing at my grill like it had personally insulted her HOA throne. I blinked once, tongs in hand, meat sizzling, utterly confused how a guy cooking ribs in his own yard could cause such apocalyptic panic. And then came the sirens. 3 police cruisers showed up before I could even take the ribs off the heat. Neighbors were peeking through blinds and cracking open beers, because nothing draws a crowd in the suburbs like a woman dialing 911 over a backyard barbecue. Karen greeted the officers like she'd just summoned divine judgment. "There!" she cried, jabbing her finger so hard in my direction I thought she might sprain it. "That man is violating fire safety codes and poisoning the air with carcinogens." I gave the officers a half-smile and lifted the lid of the grill. "Evening, officers. You're just in time. Ribs are almost done. Pulled pork's resting on the side." They didn't laugh, but they didn't cuff me either, which I considered a small win. One of the officers asked for my ID, checked my permit for the smoker. Yes, I had one, and verified that I wasn't running some underground meat cartel. Another checked the backyard setup. Propane tank secured. No open flames. Not within 10 feet of any structure. I was in the clear. Karen, however, was not letting it go. "You're going to let this menace continue? He's got smoke. Meat grease. Look at that. He's endangering property values," she ranted, waving her arms like she was flagging a helicopter for rescue. "He called me a menace," I muttered under my breath. "And I'm not even done with the potato salad." One officer, clearly the most senior, politely asked Karen for her ID as part of the incident report. "Standard procedure, ma'am," he said, trying to keep her from foaming at the mouth. Karen rolled her eyes so hard I heard a click. She muttered something about being the HOA secretary and how she knew her rights, but eventually handed over her ID. That's when things got weird. The cop stepped back to the cruiser with her license and ran it. It should have taken 30 seconds, top. But it didn't. He called something in on his radio. The tone of the conversation changed. The other two officers subtly shifted, stepping away from me and toward her. Karen, still lecturing about illegal marinades, didn't notice the growing tension. I noticed. I also noticed the officer quietly say something into his radio while side-eyeing Karen like she was a particularly unstable raccoon. After a few long minutes, the first officer came back, his face now unreadable. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "I'm going to need you to come with us." Karen laughed. "Are you kidding me? For what? For being a concerned citizen? You're arresting me because I don't want my neighborhood turned into a smokehouse." "No, ma'am," the officer replied. "There's an outstanding warrant for your arrest from Stone County." Karen froze. The color drained from her face like someone unplugged her emotions. "Warrant? That's a mistake. That can't be right. I don't even know where Stone County is." "Fraud, identity theft, and false reporting," the officer read from the screen. Karen's jaw dropped. "That's not possible. I've never committed fraud in my life. This is a setup. This is because I filed that complaint against the HOA president's niece for leaving her bike on the sidewalk." The officers didn't flinch. They moved in slowly and respectfully, reading her rights. Karen's voice cracked, then rose to a pitch usually reserved for dog whistles. "I am the HOA secretary. This is a political attack. I demand a lawyer," she screeched as they gently but firmly guided her toward the cruiser. "Tell them, Todd. Tell them I'm the only one keeping this neighborhood from descending into anarchy." "Ma'am," I said, holding up my tongs like a gavel, "you're under arrest and I'm still marinating my chicken. Please vacate the grilling area." It was petty. It was childish. It was worth it. The moment they clicked the cuffs around her wrists, a cheer went up from somewhere down the street. Cameras were out. Kids had climbed fences to get a better view. I swear someone played the cops' theme from their Bluetooth speaker. Karen was stuffed into the back of a cruiser, still ranting about secret plots and neighborhood code. I stood there, sauce-stained and stunned, trying to process what had just happened. I had started the day planning a relaxing barbecue. I ended it watching my nosy, overzealous HOA Karen get hauled away by police for crimes that had nothing to do with ribs. And something told me this was just the beginning. The next HOA meeting was held in the clubhouse, a modest stucco building with fake plants and folding chairs that somehow always managed to smell like stale coffee and wet carpet. Normally these meetings were graveyards of boredom, but tonight, the place buzzed like a courtroom drama mid-verdict. People weren't here to debate lawn fertilizer guidelines. They were here for blood or at least receipt. I arrived early, partly to claim a good seat, mostly to watch Susan sweat. She sat at the head table with her clipboard and a strained smile, flanked by the remaining Karenites. Harold, who wore the same sweater vest to every meeting like it was battle armor, and Brenda, who clutched the HOA bylaws like she thought they might physically protect her. The chair in the middle, usually occupied by Karen, sat ominously empty. They didn't even try to cover it. Just a big, gaping absence like a freshly dug grave. Susan cleared her throat and tapped her pen against the table. "Let's begin. Before we proceed to community comments, we'd like to remind everyone that Karen's situation is a private legal matter and does not reflect on the HOA board. She said it like a PR-trained robot, but the murmurs from the crowd said otherwise. I raised my hand the moment they opened the floor. "One question," I said loudly enough to silence the room. "Are the rest of you going to pretend you didn't know about her past?" Susan stiffened. Harold shuffled papers. Brenda blinked furiously, like that would teleport her elsewhere. "We were unaware of any legal issues," Susan replied evenly. "Karen's record was clean when she joined the board. We cannot be held responsible for past." "But you can be responsible for the present," I interrupted. "Because 2 days ago, I received a violation notice citing a non-existent article in the HOA bylaws. It was hand-delivered. From this board." Susan's face twitched. "There may have been a clerical mistake. The fine can be appealed in writing." "Oh, I'm not appealing," I said, standing up slowly. "I'm exposing. You see, I've kept every single document Karen ever pushed through this HOA. Every memo, every notice, every suggested donation. And guess what I found last night?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick folder labeled with color-coded tabs. Dozens of payments to non-existent vendors. Landscaping services that never happened. Repairs to things that weren't broken. And all of them signed off by her. Sometimes by you. The room gasped. It was delicious. I opened the folder and held up a few examples. "Here's a payment to Premium Community Aesthetics LLC, except no such business is registered in the state. Here's another 4 Structural Audits Incorporated, a supposed inspection firm whose website is a blank Wix template. Both paid with HOA funds. Both authorized by Karen and, in some cases, co-signed by Susan." Susan turned the color of expired yogurt. "Those were vendor referrals. Karen handled the booking. Then how come all the checks were deposited into the same account?" I asked. "Account number ending in 1947. Belonging to a woman named Kara Denton, Karen's alias in Stone County." I tossed a printout of the bank transaction on the table. A few people gasped. One neighbor dropped their phone. Now the crowd was restless. Someone shouted, "I want a refund." Another asked, "How much did she steal?" A voice from the back yelled, "I told y'all she was shady." Susan tried to regain control, gaveling with her pen like that would fix anything. "This is highly irregular. You can't just make accusations like this in a public forum." "It's not an accusation if it's documented," I said calmly. "I've already turned this over to Detective Halvorson and the county prosecutor. But the real reason I'm here isn't to argue. It's to propose a motion." That stunned them. Susan blinked. "A what?" "A motion to vote for the immediate suspension of all current board members pending an independent audit and emergency re-election. Per Article 7 of the HOA Charter, any member can call for a vote of no confidence with majority resident backing." You could hear Brenda's pen drop. Then something beautiful happened. People started standing. One by one. A dozen hands raised in support. Then 2 dozen. Then more. "I second the motion," Mr. Stevenson said, loud and proud. "Third," said Mrs. Gutierrez. "Fourth," said the guy with the koi pond Karen tried to get bulldozed. In minutes, the board's control dissolved under a wave of indignation and long-suppressed fury. Susan's voice cracked. You can't do this. This is a kangaroo court." I grinned. "No, Susan. This is what happens when you underestimate the barbecue guy." By the end of the meeting, an interim committee was formed. I was appointed as a temporary oversight liaison, basically a fancy title for guy with dirt and a backbone. We set a date for emergency elections and demanded a third-party audit of all HOA financials from the past 2 years. Susan stormed out. Harold followed, probably because his sweater vest told him to. Brenda stayed behind, shell-shocked and oddly quiet. She whispered to me before leaving, "I thought she was helping us." I nodded. So did we all. But she wasn't helping. She was harvesting. The next week was wild. Residents started combing through their own notices and violations. One woman discovered she'd paid a $300 fine for hedge irregularities when her hedge hadn't grown an inch. A guy down the street found a mandatory beautification fee Karen invented during the spring. It was like digging into a swamp and finding a labyrinth of moldy treasure. And then came the file. It was in a manila envelope taped to the inside of Karen's old mailbox, still locked, still under HOA jurisdiction. It had no name, just a sticky note on the front that read insurance, with a little smiley face that looked nothing like a smile. Inside were pages of HOA complaint logs, dozens of them, filed by Karen. Only these were never submitted through official channels. She had been keeping her own private blacklist. Names, addresses, photos, suspected violations. The worst part? She had color-coded it by how difficult the residents were. I was a red. Mr. Stevenson was a red. Brenda was actually green. People were horrified. Karen had basically created a domestic intelligence dossier for her personal HOA agenda. It was deeply creepy and only confirmed what everyone already suspected: she hadn't been enforcing rules. She'd been grooming control. We posted the file publicly, minus the private info, and held an open forum on HOA reform. The turnout was double what the board usually got. The entire neighborhood was galvanized. We rewrote voting protocols, budget transparency rules, and created a system where no one person could ever approve expenses without at least 2 separate signatures. It felt like a revolution. And in a weird way it was. But just when we thought Karen's era was finally over, we got one last surprise. She was out on bail. Someone posted a blurry photo of her in a cardigan, sunglasses, and a smug little smirk at the gas station near the freeway. A few people panicked, assuming she'd come back to wreak havoc. But the truth was even more unsettling. She had moved just 2 blocks away. Technically outside our HOA boundaries, but close enough to lurk. And based on the burner phone records Detective Halvorsen shared with me, she was still tracking the neighborhood. The only thing stopping her from interfering again? A restraining order, which I was more than happy to file. It took less than a week for the restraining order to process, and the judge, bless his overworked soul, didn't even blink when I presented the evidence. Between the forged vendor payments, the hidden blacklist, and her private cache of surveillance photos, yes, she had actually taken pictures of people's mailboxes for records, Karen had painted herself into a legal corner she couldn't charm her way out of. When I walked out of the courthouse with that signed order in hand, it felt like holding Excalibur. Karen was now legally banned from setting foot on HOA property, which included sidewalks, the clubhouse, and the public greenbelt trail she used to patrol like a one-woman militia. Still, the idea of her living just 2 blocks away was like finding out the cockroach you flushed had learned to swim. Meanwhile, the HOA was experiencing its first breath of fresh air in years. The interim committee became a full-on movement. We weren't just reacting anymore, we were building. Residents who had spent years dodging meetings and ignoring memos were suddenly volunteering for work group. People brought cookies to committee gatherings. Mr. Stevenson painted a giant mural on his garage door that read "No more Karens." Brenda, who had somehow managed to survive the fallout with her conscience semi-intact, stepped down voluntarily and apologized in public for letting charisma blind common sense. I gave her credit for that. Not much, but enough. The new board elections arrived like a thunderstorm of overdue democracy. I wasn't planning to run. Really, I wasn't. But the community kind of dragged me into it with handshakes and homemade pies and flyers printed with slogans like, "Let him smoke." And when the votes were counted, I was elected HOA president with a 92% majority. The other 8% were probably still traumatized by brisket flashbacks. Now, I know what you're thinking. Becoming HOA president makes me the villain in most of these stories. But I made a point of running things differently. Transparent budgeting, public comment periods, monthly newsletters written in plain English instead of legalese. And most importantly, no more fines unless absolutely necessary, and even then, only with a 3-person vote. Our first act? Full audit of the past 2 years' accounts. Turns out Karen had siphoned over $18,000 through fake reimbursements, bogus service fees, and a thing called decorative realignment, which apparently meant replacing bricks that didn't need replacing. But with Karen legally barred and the HOA reformed, things seemed like they might finally settle. Until someone noticed a drone. It was subtle at first. Just a little whirring buzz during our Saturday community cleanup. It hovered above the park, floated near a few driveways, and then zipped off. The first time, we thought it was some kid's toy. The second time, it flew low enough to scare a golden retriever into a sprinkler. The third time, it landed on the roof of the HOA clubhouse for 2 full minutes, recording. We had no proof it was her, of course. But Karen had been obsessed with surveillance. Her private dossier had included handwritten notes like front porch camera facing south, needs realignment, and Stevenson's koi pond equals mosquito hazard? And then there was the fact that one neighbor received an anonymous letter about her irregular hedge growth, typed in the same font Karen used on her HOA news and notes bulletins. So I did what any reasonable HOA president/grillmaster would do. I built a sting. Step 1. Post a fake neighborhood bulletin stating that the HOA had discovered secret vendor kickbacks from Karen's last board and that a confidential informant had all the evidence. Step 2. Put a fake copy of that evidence in a clearly labeled folder and leave it on the table in the clubhouse's common area. Step 3. Hide a motion-sensitive wildlife cam in the light fixture above. Step 4. Wait. We caught the footage within 48 hours. It wasn't Karen herself, of course. But it was someone wearing a hoodie, gloves, and sneakers, breaking into the locked clubhouse with a code that only board members had before the reset. They rifled through the fake folder, took photos, and then left. We enhanced the footage. The frame caught just enough of the person's face as they turned to avoid a falling broom. And there she was, Karen. Not even wearing a mask. Just sunglasses and delusion. I handed the footage to the police, who took it seriously. After all, she had violated the restraining order, broken into a facility, and accessed HOA property. A warrant was issued within the day. This time, when they came to get her, they didn't knock. She was charged with trespassing, violating a restraining order, and attempted tampering with a civic organization. I didn't even know that last one existed, but it sounded impressively specific. And that should have been the end, right? It almost was, until Susan, the former treasurer, called me in a panic. Apparently, she had received a package. No return address. Inside, a burner phone. One of Karen's. And a note that read, "If anything happens to me, open the vault." The phone had several encrypted folders and a weirdly named app called HOA Vision. With some help from a tech-savvy neighbor, we cracked it open. What we found was unhinged. Karen had been keeping audio logs, dozens of them. Rants, confessions, strategic plans. One was literally titled, "If they elect him, burn it all." She talked about drone flight paths, dummy corporations, even backdoor access codes for HOA databases she thought she might still need. The final log was the most bizarre. "Note to self," she said, "if the barbecue man gets into power, destabilize him with regulation overload. Use old blueprints. Reintroduce uniform fence heights. No one survives uniform fence heights." I sat in stunned silence, listening to her voice spiral into paranoia like a cult leader without followers. We turned everything over to the authorities, and with that final drop of madness, Karen's legacy was sealed in flames. The DA decided to bundle the new charges with her ongoing fraud case, and her bail was revoked. She was back in custody, this time for good. As for us, we celebrated the only way that made sense. We threw the biggest, loudest, most unapologetically smoky neighborhood barbecue the subdivision had ever seen. I called it the Grillers' Rebellion. We rented bounce houses, hired a live band, even installed a dunk tank. Brenda volunteered to sit in it. Mr. Stevenson finally revealed that he used to be a professional chef and brought the most delicious ribs I've ever tasted. The HOA clubhouse, once Karen's command post, was now a block party epicenter. The funniest moment of the night came when a sheriff's deputy showed up, not for trouble, but to personally deliver Karen's finalized restraining order renewal. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my brisket. Justice is slow. But barbecue? Barbecue is fast, flavorful, and best served with a side of poetic irony. The Grillers' rebellion marked a turning point, not just for the HOA but for the people in it. Neighbors stopped fearing the rulebook. They started reading it, questioning it, amending it, and through that, our neighborhood turned into what it should have been all along, a place people actually wanted to live in. Karen had ruled with fear. We were leading with firewood and community potlucks. And to this day, whenever I light my smoker, I still hear people laugh and say, "Careful, or Karen will call oh wait, never mind." Because some legacies are smoked clean. By the time the sun rose on the morning of our final community barbecue, the air already smelled like redemption. Hickory, mesquite, and maple smoke drifted lazily across the neighborhood like freedom on the breeze. The party setup began at dawn, giant grills rolling in on trailers, folding tables lined with every kind of picnic food imaginable, a cotton candy machine operated by twins from 3 streets over, and my crowning achievement, a steel smoker so large it had its own license plate. We dubbed the event Reclaim the Smoke, and this time, no one was calling the cops, at least not unless we ran out of ribs again. The clubhouse lawn was packed by noon. Kids darted between the bounce house and face painting station while parents lounged under pop-up tents, sipping lemonade and laughing about the good old days when everyone lived in fear of ornamental gnome violations. Someone had rigged a karaoke setup in front of the clubhouse steps, and Susan, yes, that Susan, was on the mic, singing "I Will Survive" to thunderous applause. It was the closest thing to a public confession I'd ever seen, and I let her have it. She'd earned her penance. Even Brenda was there, handing out little cards that read, "Ask before you fine." But the real celebration wasn't the food or the fun. It was what wasn't there. No Karen. No clipboards. No laminated flyers with obscure rule citations. For the first time in over a year, the community actually felt like a community again. We laughed without flinching. We grilled without checking over our shoulders. The HOA, once a symbol of tyranny, had become a living joke with a happy ending. And then the ending got happier. A patrol car pulled up around 2 in the afternoon, right as I was slicing through a slab of brisket the size of a throw pillow. My stomach dropped for half a second. Habit, I guess, but when the deputy stepped out and waved, I relaxed. It was Deputy Harrell, the same guy who had taken Karen in during round 2. He nodded to me, gave a polite tip of the hat to Mr. Stevenson, and then made his way through the crowd. "I've got something you might want to see," he said, holding up a padded envelope. I raised an eyebrow. "More burner phones?" "Worse," he said, and handed it over. Inside was a single USB drive, labeled HOA Final Version. We plugged it into my laptop in the clubhouse, and what we found almost made me choke on my coleslaw. Karen had been working on a manifesto. It was a full PowerPoint presentation, complete with transitions and royalty-free background music, titled, "The Order of the Association, Restoring Civic Purity." The slides detailed a vision for HOA domination on a national scale. She had blueprints for a HOA superboard, budget outlines for community surveillance integration, and even a section called Coercion Through Uniformity. Each slide was more deranged than the last. One claimed that allowing porch swings was the gateway to social collapse. Another detailed a loyalty program where residents could earn immunity from fines by reporting on neighbors. It read like the fever dream of a suburban dictator who had watched too many late-night spy thrillers and misunderstood all of them. I didn't know whether to laugh or burn it. In the end, we sent a copy to Detective Halvorsen and projected the rest onto the side of the clubhouse after sundown like a horror movie. The crowd loved it. Every time a new slide popped up, people groaned, cheered, or shouted sarcastic questions. "Is this where we pledge allegiance to the hedge trimmer?" someone yelled. "Who knew PowerPoint could commit a crime?" shouted another. At the very end of the presentation, there was one final slide. Just white text on black background. "You may have won this grill war, but order will always return." It would have been chilling if she hadn't included a stock photo of flames and the words, "Insert HOA logo here." So yeah, we weren't exactly shaking in our sandals. Karen's trial was scheduled for the following month. Between the fraud, the violation of the restraining order, the trespassing, and now the manifesto that all but declared her intentions to militarize decorative shrubbery, her legal team was floundering. The community was invited to testify, and I'd already agreed to be one of the lead witnesses. Not for revenge, though I won't lie, that was part of it, but for closure. For everyone who'd lived under the shadow of one woman's obsession with order. A few nights later, I got a call from Halvorsen. "She's taking a plea," he said. "She's agreed to a 3-year sentence and 5 years probation, with 0 contact with any HOA during that time." I nearly dropped the phone. "Wait, she's banned from HOAs? For 5 years?" "Yep. You might have made legal history, actually." We threw another barbecue that night. A quiet one. Just a few of us on my back patio, the air warm, the sky clear, and for the first time in a long while, the sound of laughter unaccompanied by shouting, sirens, or fines. I raised a toast with my mason jar of sweet tea. "To the fall of the Karen Empire," I said. "And to the sacred right to grill in peace." Everyone clinked their jars together. Life settled after that. The HOA became what it was supposed to be, boring. We replaced the complaint box with a suggestion box. The most heated debate at meetings was whether we should repaint the tennis court lines in blue or green. I still smoked brisket on weekends, and no one said a word, except to ask for seconds. And then, one day, long after the dust had settled, I got a letter. No return address. Handwritten. No threats. No manifesto. Just a short note. "I underestimated you. You were never just a guy with tongs. You were the only one paying attention. And I hate that I respect that. K." I stared at it for a long time. And then I fed it to the smoker. Because in the end, some smoke is best left to disappear. Today, when new neighbors move in, we tell them the story. About the barbecue that started a rebellion. About the woman who tried to build an empire out of fine print. And about the day the cops showed up expecting a fire hazard and left with a fugitive. Sometimes they think we're exaggerating. That's fine. We let them think that. Until the next HOA meeting, when someone jokingly suggests banning charcoal, and the entire room goes quiet for 2 full seconds before bursting into laughter. Because this neighborhood has been through the worst kind of order. And now? Now it's free. Free to grill. Free to garden. Free to paint your porch orange if that's what makes you happy. Because the tyrant's rule is over, the smoke has cleared, and justice, like brisket, is always better slow-cooked and served hot.